The mysterious visitors. In the quiet expanse of the night sky, a strange shimmer appeared, as if the stars themselves were shifting. High above Earth, a ship unlike any seen before began its descent toward the planet. The 4 alien women aboard this vessel sat in silence, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. They had never seen a planet like Earth, its blue oceans and green landmasses shining brightly below them. The air was thick with mystery, and their mission was unlike any they had ever undertaken. These women weren't like humans. Their beauty was otherworldly, delicate features, eyes that glimmered like distant galaxies, and skin that seemed to glow softly in the dim light. Their appearance was alien, yet their thoughts were not. They had come to Earth to study the humans that lived there, but their purpose was more than just observation. They had heard rumors, whispers in the stars, about the terrifying nature of the human race. As the ship touched down on the surface of Earth, the aliens looked out the window. The humans, they had been told, were violent and unpredictable. They were carnivorous, capable of great destruction. Stories of humans hunting and fighting each other spread across the galaxy, and the alien women were terrified. They had been warned that approaching Earth was risky, that humans would view them as prey, not friends. But still, they were drawn to this planet. Something about Earth felt important, mysterious, and intriguing. The leader of the group, a tall alien named Nira, looked at her companions. "Remember why we're here," she said softly. "We need to understand them, but we must be careful. They may be more dangerous than we know." Her voice was calm, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had heard the stories, just like the others. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if the tales were exaggerated. Could these humans truly be as terrifying as everyone claimed? Another alien, Kiva, stared out the window with wide eyes. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if they don't like us? What if they see us as food?" The thought made her stomach twist. The idea of encountering a human was enough to make her skin crawl. She could imagine their sharp teeth, their wild eyes, and their unpredictable behavior. How could they possibly survive in a world where humans ruled? But Nira shook her head. "We must. We cannot return without answers. These humans, they might hold the key to something bigger than any of us realize." Nira was the strongest of the group, always the one to keep her fears in check. But even she couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. They had no idea what to expect when they met the humans. Would they be as dangerous as the stories suggested, or was there something more to them? The ship gently landed in a remote part of the world, far from the cities and the eyes of the general population. The alien women stepped out, their feet touching the earth for the first time. The ground beneath them felt strange, different from their home planet. The air was thick, filled with the scent of plants and animals. It was almost too much for them to process. They had never experienced anything like it. The planet was alive. Birds flew overhead, and strange creatures scuttled about on the ground. The beauty of Earth was overwhelming, yet it only added to the tension the women felt. This was not the peaceful, quiet place they had expected. No, Earth was full of life, wild and untamed. And the humans, they were a mystery, a force that neither the aliens nor their advanced technology could fully understand. Nira motioned for the others to follow. "Stay close," she instructed. "We don't know what we're dealing with here. We need to observe first." She had a plan in mind, but the fear she felt was undeniable. The first step was to find a human and learn from them. But how would they do that? And if they encountered a human, would they even be able to communicate? There was so much to consider, so much to fear. What if things went wrong? The women slowly made their way through the dense forest, staying low to avoid being seen. They moved carefully, observing everything around them. Every rustle in the trees, every snap of a twig made them freeze in place. Could it be a human, or was it some other creature? The tension was almost unbearable. As they moved deeper into the woods, The sounds of the planet began to change. They could hear footsteps, but not from any creature they recognized. Suddenly, they saw him, a human. He was tall, muscular, and looked as though he had been hunting. He was carrying a spear, his eyes scanning the surroundings, alert for any sign of danger. The alien women froze, watching him closely. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment that would answer all their questions. But instead of the fear they expected, there was something else, something more complex. The human didn't seem aggressive. He was simply moving through the forest, unaware of their presence. His face was focused, but there was no sign of malice or violence. He seemed normal. It was confusing, almost like they had been lied to. Could this human be different from the others they had heard about? Could it be possible that the stories were wrong? Nira's heart raced. They had come to Earth expecting the worst, but now they were faced with a truth they hadn't prepared for. The humans didn't seem like the monsters they had been told about. This was only the beginning, and they had no idea what would happen next. But one thing was clear: the journey to understand humans had just begun. And as the alien women watched the human disappear into the trees, their fear began to fade, replaced by curiosity. What they would discover next was more than they ever could have imagined. The unsettling discovery. The air was thick with tension as the alien women stood frozen, hidden in the shadows of the forest, watching the human as he moved through the trees. Nira, the leader, held her breath, her mind racing with questions. What was this creature? He had not shown any signs of aggression, but could that really be true? Was he just biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike? For a moment, the world seemed to hold still. The human stopped, looking around. His dark eyes scanned the trees, the same trees that the aliens were crouched behind. His gaze moved over the forest, but he didn't seem to notice the aliens. He was focused, intent on something else. It was then that they saw it. The human raised his spear high, his muscles rippling as he prepared for something, but it wasn't a confrontation with them. No, he was hunting. A large, wild creature burst from the underbrush, and the human moved swiftly, silently, as though he were one with the forest. In a single fluid motion, he thrust the spear forward, and in an instant, the creature was down. The aliens gasped, not in fear, but in awe. The human had moved with such precision, with such skill. It was almost as if he had been born to hunt. His strength, his control, was unlike anything they had ever seen. But what unsettled them the most wasn't his ability to kill. It was the look on his face. There was no triumph, no joy in his actions. There was only a deep sense of purpose, a focus that seemed almost detached. Kiva, one of the alien women, stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. What? What is he doing? Is this what humans are like? Why did he? Her voice trailed off, uncertainty filling her words. Her mind was struggling to understand the scene. The creature he had killed wasn't a threat. It had simply been part of the wild world around him. But to the aliens, it was a reminder of the stories they had heard. Stories of humans killing without mercy, of their hunger for violence and destruction. But Nira's sharp eyes caught something else. The human wasn't just hunting. There was a ritualistic calm to his actions. He wasn't savoring the kill, he was simply surviving. There was a deeper meaning to what he was doing, one that none of the alien women had expected. This human was part of a world they couldn't yet understand. A world where survival didn't mean mindless killing, but a balanced, quiet power. Nira nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing in thought. "We've been told they are killers," she said in a low voice, her words barely a whisper. "But this doesn't feel like what we were told. Maybe it's not about what he does, but why he does it." The others exchanged uncertain glances, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. The human moved calmly toward the fallen creature, kneeling beside it. He didn't seem happy or proud. He simply began to prepare the creature, carving its flesh with precise, practiced movements. It was a strange thing to witness. This simple, practical act of survival. For the alien women, it was a puzzle, a challenge to their understanding of the humans they had been taught to fear. Zora, the youngest of the group, stepped forward, her curiosity overtaking her fear. "Why would he do this?" she murmured. "This doesn't look like something a monster would do." Her voice was filled with wonder as she watched the human work, his movements graceful and methodical. For the first time, the alien women began to question everything they had learned about the human race. Could they have been wrong all along? Nira turned to her companions, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Maybe," she began slowly, "we've misunderstood them. Maybe they're not just mindless killers. Maybe they are survivors, like us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. She knew they had only witnessed a small piece of the human's world, but already it was clear that the picture they had been given, the one filled with fear and aggression, was incomplete. The human finished his task and stood up, wiping his hands on his clothes. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring into the distance. There was a quiet sadness in his posture, a weight that pressed on his shoulders, as if the act of survival itself had drained him. But the sadness wasn't for the creature he had killed. It was something deeper, something the alien women couldn't yet understand. Kiva took a step back, her heart still racing. "We need to leave. We're too close. What if he notices us?" Nira shook her head, her gaze fixed on the human. "Not yet. We need to see more. This is not what we expected. We need to understand why he does this." As the human disappeared into the trees, the aliens were left in stunned silence. They had come to Earth with one mission: to observe, to learn, and to determine whether humans were the monsters they had been told about. But what they had seen, what they had discovered, had opened up a new set of questions. Were humans truly the dangerous carnivorous beings the galaxy had warned them about? Or was there something far more complex, something hidden beneath the surface that they had yet to discover? The uncertainty lingered in the air as the alien women retreated into the shadows, their minds racing with the possibilities. One thing was certain: their journey on Earth had just begun, and what they would find here would change everything they thought they knew about the human race. The truth revealed. As the last remnants of the day's light disappeared, the alien women huddled together in a quiet corner of the forest, their eyes locked on the human's trail. The encounter had left them uneasy, filled with more questions than answers. They had seen a side of the human that didn't match the stories. His calm, almost detached manner had unsettled them, but it had also sparked something else: curiosity. The images of him, working silently with the creature he had hunted, lingered in their minds. Was this truly the violent, carnivorous being they had been warned about? Nira, still on edge but determined, turned to her companions. "We can't just hide in the shadows forever. We need to understand him better, to know the truth about humans." Her voice was steady, though the uncertainty in her heart flickered behind her calm facade. Her plan was simple: they needed to find him again and speak to him. The time for observation was over. If they wanted answers, they would have to ask. Kiva, who had been the most reluctant, shifted uncomfortably. "But what if he doesn't understand us? What if he sees us as enemies? We don't know anything about him, Nira. He could be just as dangerous as the stories say." Her voice trembled, but there was a hint of excitement in it as well. The encounter had left her more curious than afraid. Nira's eyes softened as she looked at her friend. "We won't know unless we try." She motioned for the others to follow her. "Stay close. We must approach cautiously, but we must approach. The truth is out there, and we won't find it by hiding." With hesitant but resolute steps, the alien women ventured deeper into the forest, following the human's trail. The path he had taken earlier was still fresh, and they moved silently through the dense foliage, their movements fluid, almost practiced. But even with their skills, the forest seemed alive with the sound of unseen creatures, each rustle and snap of a branch sending a ripple of tension through the group. It didn't take long before they spotted him again, this time sitting on a large rock by a river, staring out into the flowing water. His posture was relaxed, his gaze distant, lost in thought. The sight of him, so calm and still, was in stark contrast to what the alien women had been told about humans. The stories spoke of rage, violence, and a thirst for blood. Yet here he was, just another being in the vast wilderness, contemplating the world around him. The women moved forward, slowly and carefully, trying not to startle him. When they were only a few meters away, Nira raised her hand, signaling them to stop. It was now or never. This was the moment that would determine everything. The moment they would either learn the truth or be forced to flee in fear of what they had misunderstood. Nira stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her mind focused. She spoke softly, her voice carrying across the distance. Human, she called, the word unfamiliar and awkward on her tongue. We wish to speak with you. For a long moment, the human didn't move. He didn't even acknowledge them. The silence stretched between them like an invisible wall, and the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Then, slowly, the human turned his head, his eyes locking with Nira's. His gaze was unreadable, neither hostile nor welcoming, but curious, as though he had been expecting them. The alien women held their breath, waiting for his response. Would he speak? Would he attack? Or would he ignore them entirely? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the human spoke. His voice was rough but calm. You're not from here, he said simply, his words laced with a sense of realization. I thought I saw something earlier. So it's true. You're not from this world. Nira nodded cautiously. No, we're not from this planet. We've come to understand you, to learn what you truly are. Her words were measured, careful, as though every syllable carried weight. She couldn't afford to make any missteps now. The human didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied them, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to gauge whether they were friend or foe. The aliens could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity of his scrutiny, but there was no sign of fear or aggression, just curiosity. It was as if he was waiting for them to prove themselves. After a long pause, he sighed and stood up, brushing off his clothes. I suppose you want to know about us, he said, more to himself than to them. But you've got it all wrong. We're not monsters. We never were. His voice was low, almost sad, as if the words held a painful truth. The alien women exchanged uncertain glances. The human's words were unexpected, completely different from what they had heard in the galaxy. They had expected something more violent, more primal, but here he was, speaking of something deeper, something they couldn't yet understand. You've been told that we're dangerous, the human continued, his eyes distant. That we're killers, carnivores with no morals. But the truth is, we're just trying to survive, like every other living thing. He looked at them then, his eyes softening. Humans may hunt, but we don't kill for fun. We kill to live. We hunt to eat, and we live with the consequences of our actions. Nira stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. But the stories say you're violent, that you attack without reason, that you're bloodthirsty. The human's expression softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. The stories aren't the whole truth, he said quietly. Humans may be flawed, but we're not monsters. We've fought wars, sure. We've made mistakes, but we've also learned. We've grown. The truth is, we're more than what you've been told. The alien women stood in stunned silence, absorbing his words. For the first time since they had arrived on Earth, the veil of fear began to lift. They had come expecting to find a bloodthirsty species, but instead they were faced with a complex, introspective being, one that had its own struggles, its own burdens. As the last of the daylight faded into twilight, the human sat back down on the rock, his gaze once again fixed on the flowing river. The aliens stood a little farther back, their thoughts swirling. The truth about humans was far more complicated than they had been led to believe. They had come to Earth looking for monsters, But they had found something entirely different, a species struggling, surviving, and growing, just like them. And in that moment, the alien women realized that they had only just begun to uncover the real story of the humans. The journey ahead would be far more complex than they could have ever imagined. The fearful realization. The night had settled over the forest, a cloak of darkness that seemed to swallow every sound. The alien women sat at the edge of a small clearing, their minds spinning with the humans' words. It was clear now. Earth's inhabitants were not the mindless beasts they had been led to believe. But that didn't make them any less dangerous. If anything, it made them more unpredictable, more complex. The stories that had filled their ears back on their home planet had been only half the truth, and that revelation raised new questions, ones that left them uneasy, unsure of what they were truly facing. Nera, as always, was the first to break the silence. She stared into the flickering light of a small fire, the flames dancing wildly in the night breeze. "I didn't expect this," she said softly, her voice more vulnerable than usual. "I thought we would find only violence, only fear, but now I'm not sure what to think. This human, he doesn't seem like what we've been told. But is that enough to trust him?" The group was silent, each alien processing the encounter in their own way. Kiva, still shaken by the exchange, wrapped her arms tightly around herself. "How can we trust him?" she asked, her voice edged with doubt. "We've seen what they're capable of. He may say they're not monsters, but the history of their kind. We can't judge them only by their past," Nera interjected, her tone firm, yet tinged with uncertainty. "What we're seeing is a different side of humanity, a side we never thought possible. But does that mean they won't turn on us?" Kiva pressed, her anxiety growing. "How do we know he won't attack us when we least expect it? How do we know they won't all turn out to be like the stories? We've only seen one human, one small part of their world." Naira's gaze softened, but her mind was racing. Kiva was right. They had only seen a glimpse, a fleeting moment that could easily have been deceiving. The human they had encountered seemed different, but how could they know for sure? The alien women had come here with the goal of understanding the humans, but now they were faced with a dilemma. What if the human they had spoken to was an outlier, one of the few who had managed to rise above the savagery they'd been warned about? What if they were all the same, their true nature hidden beneath a facade of civility? "We can't just run from this," Nera said, determination creeping into her voice. "If we leave now, we'll never know the truth. We must stay, observe more. We must see more of their world, not just one human, but many." Zora, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. Her voice was small, but it carried a weight of its own. "What if we've already seen enough?" she asked, a hint of fear lacing her words. "We saw him kill that creature earlier. He seemed calm, but he's still a hunter, still someone capable of violence. We can't ignore that." "That's the thing," Nera replied, her voice lowering to a thoughtful murmur. "What we saw was not violence for the sake of violence. He killed, yes, but he did it to survive, not out of rage. It's a difficult thing to understand, but survival is different from cruelty." The night grew colder, and the air around them seemed to thicken with the weight of their conversation. Each alien woman wrestled with the same thought. They had come to Earth seeking to uncover the true nature of humanity, but the more they learned, the more their perceptions seemed to blur. As they sat in silence, a distant noise reached their ears, an echo of something far off in the dark. The unmistakable sound of human voices. It was subtle at first, almost drowned out by the wind, but as the minutes passed, it became clearer. The aliens looked at each other, a mix of fear and curiosity in their eyes. Nera motioned for everyone to stay low, her body tense with the anticipation of what might be coming. "It's time to find out more," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. They moved cautiously toward the sound, careful not to make a noise. As they crept through the underbrush, they finally reached a small clearing where a group of humans had gathered around a campfire. The alien women hid in the shadows, watching silently as the humans spoke to each other in a language they couldn't understand. But what caught their attention wasn't the language. It was the atmosphere. The humans weren't aggressive. They weren't shouting or fighting. Instead, they were laughing, talking, sharing food, and telling stories. There was no sign of the violence the aliens had been warned about. In fact, it was the opposite. The humans seemed normal, relaxed. They were just living their lives, in their own way, with their own rituals. And yet, as the aliens observed them, the unsettling truth began to dawn on them. These humans, these creatures they had been taught to fear, were capable of far more than just survival. They were capable of connection, of building relationships, of caring for one another. The violence they had witnessed wasn't the whole picture. There was another side to humanity, one that was just as complex and deep. Zora, who had been watching intently, looked up at Nira. They don't look like monsters," she said, almost to herself. "They look like us. Just different." Nira's heart sank. The truth was clear now. The humans weren't what they had been told to expect, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. In fact, it might be worse. The danger wasn't just in their strength or their carnivorous nature. It was in their unpredictability, their complexity. They were creatures of extremes, capable of both great violence and great compassion. "These humans," Nira whispered, her voice filled with a new understanding. "They're not just survivors. They're something more, something we haven't yet figured out." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. The alien women had come to Earth seeking clarity, but now they were faced with a truth they couldn't ignore. The fear they had felt upon arrival was no longer enough to explain what they were seeing. They had underestimated the humans. And now, they had to face the reality that understanding them might be far more dangerous and more necessary than they had ever imagined. The moment of truth. The fire in the clearing flickered low, casting long shadows that stretched across the forest floor like dark fingers reaching for the unknown. The alien women remained hidden, watching the group of humans interact around their fire. The more they observed, the more the puzzle pieces shifted and clicked together. They had seen the brutality of the human race firsthand, the hunt, the violence, but they had also witnessed something else, something that contradicted every story they had heard. The quiet moments of connection, the laughter shared, the camaraderie. Nira sat back against the cool bark of a tree, her mind racing. Every piece of this strange puzzle, the human race, the stories, the myths, seemed to be slipping through her fingers, just out of reach. There was no simple answer, no clear line that separated the humans into good and evil. They were neither monsters nor saints. They were something else entirely, something she still couldn't grasp. "You were right, Nira," Zora whispered, her voice filled with awe as she continued to watch the humans. "They are so different from what we were told. But how can that be? Why would anyone want us to think they're like beasts?" Nira frowned, her mind swirling with the implications of Zora's question. Who had told them these stories? Who had painted the humans as dangerous creatures? She had assumed it was fear that led to the galaxy-wide warnings, but now she wondered if there was something more behind it. Was there a purpose to all the rumors, a reason to demonize humans? She couldn't be sure. "We need to understand them," Nira said finally, her voice low but determined. "There's more going on here than we've been led to believe. We're not just dealing with a dangerous species. These humans, they have something we don't fully comprehend." The night wore on, and the humans around the fire grew quiet, their voices lowering as they began to settle in for the night. The alien women knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Soon, the humans would be asleep, and this opportunity to learn more would slip away. If they wanted to get to the heart of what humanity was really about, they needed to act now. But how? How could they approach without being seen as threats? As the humans began to fall silent, a sudden movement caught Nira's eye. The human they had encountered earlier, the one who had been hunting, stood up and walked toward the edge of the clearing. His movements were calm, measured, and he didn't seem to notice the 4 aliens lurking in the shadows. Mira's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. "Now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Without a second thought, Mira stepped into the open, her alien form lit by the faint glow of the dying fire. The others followed her, their steps light but purposeful. As they emerged from the shadows, the human turned, his eyes narrowing at the unexpected sight. He didn't seem afraid. Not yet, at least, but there was something else in his gaze, something she couldn't read. Was it curiosity, caution, or something darker? For a long moment, the human simply stared at them, his hand resting on the hilt of the spear at his side. The tension between them was palpable. The air crackled with the weight of their unspoken questions. But Mira wasn't going to retreat this time. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "We're not here to hurt you," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We've been watching you, observing. We need to understand. Who are you? What are you?" The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a cautious step forward, his eyes flicking between Mira and the others. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice low but clear. "Why are you here?" he asked, his words sharp with suspicion. "What do you want from us?" Mira paused, considering her words carefully. This was a delicate moment. "We want to know the truth," she said, her voice steady. "The stories we've heard, they don't match what we've seen. We came here expecting danger, but all we found is confusion. We don't understand your kind, your people." The human's expression softened, though there was still a guarded look in his eyes. "You came here to find monsters," he said quietly. "But we're not monsters. We're human." His gaze lingered on them for a moment before he let out a sigh, the weight of it heavy with something Mira couldn't quite place. "We're flawed, and we make mistakes, but we're not the bloodthirsty animals you've been told about." The words hit Mira harder than she expected. She had known, deep down, that the humans weren't the monsters they had been made out to be. But hearing them say it, hearing it come from one of them, struck a chord deep within her. It was the kind of truth she had been searching for, a truth that wasn't about survival, or violence, or myth, but about the nature of the human race itself. "You're not the beasts we thought you were," Mira said, her voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "But you're not saints either. So, what are you? What does it mean to be human?" The human's face seemed to harden for a moment, as though the question had struck a nerve. He took a step back, staring into the distance, as if contemplating something far deeper than Mira had expected. "To be human," he said slowly, his voice filled with a quiet intensity, "is to struggle. To survive, yes, but also to learn, to grow, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. Sometimes we fail, sometimes we fall, but we always get up again. That's what being human is." Mira stood silently, absorbing his words. She had come here seeking answers, seeking something simple, something clear. But the truth, it seemed, was never that simple. Humanity was not a one-dimensional thing. It was a vast, tangled web of contradictions and complexities, of strengths and flaws. And though she had only scratched the surface, Mira understood now. The humans weren't just dangerous. They were capable of far more than that. They were capable of growth, of change, of redemption. In that moment, Mira realized that the truth she had been searching for wasn't something she could just observe from a distance. It was something she had to experience. And perhaps, just perhaps, this meeting was only the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. As the fire flickered one last time, casting long shadows over the clearing, Mira and her companion stood there, unsure of what would come next. But one thing was certain: the journey to truly understand humanity had only just begun. The shift in perspective. The dawn was breaking, casting a soft golden hue across the forest as the first light of day touched the world. The fire from the night before had long since burned out, leaving behind only faint embers and the smell of charred wood. Nira stood in the quiet aftermath of their encounter with the human, staring into the horizon, her thoughts a whirlwind. Everything had shifted in a way she hadn't expected. The moment they had shared by the fire with the human had left its mark on her. More than just the exchange of words, more than the answers she had sought. There was something in the human's eyes that lingered, something deeper than any of the stories she had heard. It was a realization that had begun to grow within her, a truth that she had been too afraid to accept until now. Humans, for all their flaws and unpredictability, were not the monsters they had been made out to be. They were something else entirely. As the others stirred from their makeshift resting places, Nira turned to them, her mind still processing the conversation. "I thought we came here to find answers," she began slowly, her voice almost a whisper. "But the truth, it's not what we expected. We've been looking at them through the wrong lens." Kiva, who had spent the night deep in thought, was the first to respond. "What do you mean?" Her voice was cautious, as if she still wasn't sure where Nira was going with this. "We saw what they can do. We saw how they kill, how they fight. They're not as peaceful as they claim to be." Nira shook her head, the weight of the realization pressing on her chest. "No, Kiva, it's not about violence. It's about survival. It's about the choices they make in the face of their own existence. Yes, they fight. Yes, they hunt. But they do it to live, not to destroy." Zora, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "But what about the darkness? What about the rage? We saw it when he was hunting, when he was alone in the forest." "It's there, Nira. It's in them." Nira nodded, acknowledging Zora's point. "Yes, the darkness is there, but it's not the whole picture. What we saw last night, what we heard from him, wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding, about learning from their mistakes, about wanting to be better. They're not perfect, but they have something that sets them apart from what we've been told, the ability to grow, to evolve." The group fell silent as Nira's words sank in. It was a hard truth to accept, especially after everything they had heard about humans before coming here. They had been taught to fear them, to view them as a danger to the galaxy. But what if those stories had been incomplete? What if the real threat wasn't the humans themselves, but the misunderstandings that had been passed down across the stars? Kiva spoke again, her voice softer now. "So what are we supposed to do with this? If they're not monsters, if they're capable of growth, then what? Do we just forget everything we were told? Do we trust them?" Nira looked at each of her companions in turn, the weight of the decision heavy in the air. "I don't know if we can just forget what we've been told," she admitted. "But I do know this. We need to stop seeing them as just one thing. They're not just violent, not just survivors, not just anything. They're a species in the middle of something bigger than we can understand. We've been too quick to judge them based on our fears." Zora let out a slow breath, her eyes wide with the realization. We've been so focused on what they could do to us that we never thought about what they could teach us. The words hung in the air, and in that moment, Nira understood. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about perspective. Humans weren't just a threat to be neutralized or understood. They were a lesson about resilience, about change, about overcoming flaws. They were proof that a species could survive its own worst impulses, learn from its mistakes, and adapt. The aliens had come here to judge, but in the process, they had missed the most important part of all, the potential for growth. "We've watched them," Nira continued, her voice steady, "but we haven't truly seen them. They're more than what they've been through, more than their past, and we've been blind to that." There was a quiet pause as the women processed her words. They had come to Earth looking for answers, but what they found wasn't what they had expected. The humans were capable of great darkness, but they were also capable of something that the aliens couldn't ignore, something they had been searching for all along: hope. The quiet realization dawned upon them all that they, too, had been hiding from the truth. They had been hiding from the complexity of their own fears, afraid to confront the full picture of humanity because it was easier to label them as monsters. But now, as the sun rose higher in the sky, they knew that their journey was far from over. They had learned something important. To truly understand a species, to see them for what they are, you have to look beyond the surface, beyond the stories, beyond the fears. The alien women turned their eyes back to the humans they had come to observe, the humans who were so much more than the creatures they had been warned about. Their journey had only just begun, but now, Nira and her companions saw that the path forward was one of understanding, not of fear. "What now?" Kiva asked, her voice filled with quiet wonder. Nira's gaze softened as she looked towards the horizon. "Now we see them for who they truly are, and maybe, just maybe, we can learn from them too." The unexpected connection. The morning light poured through the trees, casting long, dappled shadows across the forest floor. The air was cool but alive with the sounds of birds and distant creatures stirring in the underbrush. The alien women had spent the night deep in thought, reflecting on everything they had learned and everything that had been revealed. The truth about humanity had shifted, turning from a dangerous unknown into something much more complex. What they had once feared and misunderstood now seemed like something they could not ignore. Nira stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the horizon. The others gathered around her, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but united in a way they hadn't been before. It was strange. An uneasy calm had settled over them, one that felt more like acceptance than uncertainty. They had come to Earth with one purpose: to uncover the truth about the humans, to decide whether they posed a threat or not. But what they had found was so much more than they had expected. It was as if they had peeled away the surface only to uncover a deeper mystery. The human they had spoken to the night before, who had shown them that violence was not all there was to humanity, was still fresh in Nira's mind. He was nothing like the stories they had been told. He was a man who had known loss, who had witnessed the darkness in his own kind, and yet he was still trying to do better, to learn, to survive with some kind of dignity. He was an enigma, a contradiction, and yet, in that contradiction, there was something strangely comforting, something familiar. Nira turned to the others. "We've seen them," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of their journey. "We've seen their flaws and their strength. And I believe we've learned more than we ever thought possible." Zora looked at her, the uncertainty that had once clouded her face now replaced with something else, a quiet understanding. "But how do we move forward?" she asked. "What do we do now that we know the truth?" Nira took a deep breath, her mind clearing with the realization of what needed to be done. "Now we build something. We bridge the gap between us and them. We've seen how they fight, how they struggle to survive. But what we didn't see, what we failed to understand until now, is their ability to evolve, to change. We have to recognize that. And we have to make sure they recognize us, not as invaders, but as allies." Kiva, who had been the most skeptical of them all, now seemed to see something she hadn't before. "You mean, we try to understand them, not just as a threat, but as a species with its own struggles, its own story?" "Exactly," Nira said, her eyes intense with conviction. "We're not here to conquer them, and we're not here to judge them anymore. We're here to learn from them, to see what they can offer the galaxy. And maybe, just maybe, they can learn from us too." As she spoke, the air seemed to shift. The quiet realization was dawning on all of them. They had come here with fear, with preconceived notions, but now they were leaving with something much more profound, a sense of shared humanity. The truth was that the humans weren't just different. They were like them, in ways they hadn't imagined. They had strengths, weaknesses, fears, and dreams, just like any other species. They fought against their own darkness, just as every civilization had done before. And in that struggle, they were learning to survive, to grow, to become something better. The human they had met the night before was a reflection of that struggle. He was no different than them. He was a being trying to navigate a complicated world, trying to make sense of the chaos around him. And in that quiet, raw honesty, Nira saw something beautiful, the potential for connection, not through power or dominance, but through mutual respect and understanding. "It's not just about us and them anymore," Nira said, her voice softer now. "It's about what we can create together, what we can build, side by side." For the first time since their arrival on Earth, the alien women understood what had been missing. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown that had held them back. It was the belief that they were too different to ever truly connect with another species. But now, they saw that their differences didn't have to divide them. They could learn from one another, support each other, and build a future together. The bond between them and the humans wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper, something more lasting. As they made their way back to the clearing, ready to leave and continue their mission, Nira felt something stir inside her, a sense of hope, an understanding that perhaps the greatest lesson they had learned on Earth wasn't about the humans at all. It was about themselves. How often had they been quick to judge others, quick to label them as threats without truly seeing them? How many times had they let fear cloud their ability to grow and connect? The journey had been more than just an exploration of Earth. It had been a journey of self-discovery, a lesson in compassion and patience, and it was one that would stay with them forever, no matter where they went next. As the alien women prepared to depart, Nira looked back one last time. The forest, once so foreign and filled with danger, now seemed peaceful. Earth was a place of contradictions, of light and dark, of beauty and violence, of growth and decay. But it was also a place where anything could change, where every being had the potential to become something more than what they were. And with that, they left the forest behind, not as conquerors, but as travelers who had seen a truth that was far greater than what they had ever expected, a truth that would echo through the stars for generations to come. The unexpected connection had been made, and in that connection, a new chapter had begun.